April 27, 2011. Meteorologists issued a rare high-risk warning as atmospheric conditions aligned in a way seen only once in a generation. By nightfall, Tuscaloosa and Birmingham lay shredded. An EF4 tornado spent 90 relentless minutes on the ground, destroying homes and futures and claiming lives, including 6 university students. But how did a single storm reach such catastrophic power? And what made this day unlike any tornado event before? Across the southeastern United States, April 27, 2011, became a day unlike any in living memory. The Storm Prediction Center issued a high-risk forecast, a warning reserved for the rarest and most dangerous conditions. Meteorologists nationwide tracked a system that would defy records and unleash a scale of destruction not seen in generations. By the time the sun set, 336 tornadoes had touched down across 21 states, stretching from Mississippi to Virginia. Entire communities braced as the outbreak unfolded hour by hour, each new tornado adding to a growing list of emergencies. Alabama stood at the center of this crisis, bearing the brunt of the devastation. The numbers told their own story: more than 200 deaths in Alabama alone, hundreds more injured, and billions of dollars in property lost. For meteorologists, the sheer scope of the outbreak was staggering. High-risk outlooks had only been issued a handful of times before. On this day, the atmosphere aligned in a way that made violent tornadoes not just possible, but likely across a vast region. The National Weather Service and local broadcasters worked around the clock, issuing warning after warning as supercells erupted across the landscape. The scale of the threat became clear as reports poured in. Town after town hit, neighborhoods erased, entire blocks reduced to rubble. In Alabama, the outbreak produced 4 tornadoes rated EF4 or higher, each one capable of leveling homes and scouring the ground. The numbers continued to climb: 336 tornadoes in a single outbreak, a figure that eclipsed every previous record in U.S. history. What happened in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a much larger catastrophe that stretched across the South. The enormity of the event demanded answers. How could so many powerful storms erupt on a single day? What forces came together to make April 27th a date that would be studied for years to come? The answers would be found not just in the destruction left behind, but in the science of the atmosphere itself. On April 27, 2011, the atmosphere above Alabama was primed for disaster. The ingredients for violent, long-lived tornadoes were all present, setting the stage for a storm that would defy expectations. Meteorologists measured convective available potential energy, known as CAPE, above 2,000 joules per kilogram. This level of instability is rarely seen, especially across such a wide area. It meant the air was loaded with energy, ready to surge upward and fuel explosive thunderstorm growth at the slightest trigger. But energy alone does not create a tornado. The wind profile that day was extraordinary. Storm relative helicity, known as SRH, soared to extreme values, signaling that winds were changing speed and direction rapidly with height. This twisting motion in the lower atmosphere allowed thunderstorms to spin, a key factor in developing supercells capable of producing tornadoes. At the same time, the low-level jet, an invisible river of fast-moving air just a few thousand feet above the ground, strengthened through the afternoon, feeding these storms with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. The combination of high CAPE and extreme helicity created a volatile mix, supporting rotating updrafts that could persist for hours. Another critical factor was the low cloud base, measured by meteorologists as the lifted condensation level, known as LCL. On this day, the LCL hovered between 400 and 500 meters above the ground, unusually low for the region. A low cloud base means that the spinning column of air at the surface can more easily connect to the rotating updraft above, making it far more likely for tornadoes to form and reach the ground. These low LCL values, together with the powerful low-level jet and high instability, set the stage for storms that would not only form rapidly, but also maintain their structure and intensity as they raced across the landscape. Forensic meteorology reports from the outbreak highlight how these parameters combined in a rare alignment. CAPE in the top percentile, extreme SRH, unusually low LCL values, and a roaring low-level jet all pointed to the potential for violent, long-lived tornadoes. The stage was set for supercells that could sustain rotation for hours, tracking across entire counties without weakening. With these forces in place, the atmosphere over Alabama was ready for a disaster that would be studied for years to come. Near the quiet crossroads of Union, Alabama, a radar signature flickered to life just after 5 p.m. Central Daylight Time. For meteorologists, the moment stood out, a tight couplet of wind velocities, the telltale sign of rotation now unmistakable on the National Weather Service screens. In the fields and pine woods west of Tuscaloosa, the sky darkened with a deep, unnatural hue. Livestock shifted uneasily, and the air pressed down with a heavy stillness. In these rural stretches, the first evidence of the tornado was subtle, a distant roar, trees bending, barns rattling as the pressure dropped. At ground level, the tornado's birth was sudden and violent. The initial touchdown near Union tore through stands of timber and scattered out buildings, leaving a ragged line of snapped trunks and twisted debris. The first homes in its path, mostly single-story houses and mobile homes, stood little chance. Walls crumpled, roofs peeled away, and metal sheds were tossed across pastures like scraps of paper. Power lines fell, plunging pockets of the countryside into darkness even before the full force of the storm arrived. Within minutes, the tornado's structure grew in size and intensity. What began as a narrow funnel quickly widened, the base expanding as it gathered strength from the storm's powerful updrafts. Radar operators watched as the velocity couplet tightened, the inbound and outbound winds accelerating toward each other, evidence of a rapidly strengthening vortex. The storm's forward speed, nearly 50 miles per hour, allowed little time for those in its path to react. Farmers and rural residents, some alerted by weather radios or hurried phone calls, scrambled for shelter. In some cases, families huddled in hallways or storm pits, listening as the wind built to a deafening roar. Others, caught outside or on the road, had only moments to brace for impact. The tornado carved a path through fields and woodlots, flattening everything in its way. Fences vanished, livestock scattered, and the landscape behind the storm was stripped bare in places, as if a giant hand had raked across the earth. The rural touchdown near Union was over in moments, but its effects lingered, a trail of destruction stretching northeast, growing wider and more menacing with every mile. The radar image, once a small ominous swirl, now showed a massive, organized signature. The tornado was no longer just a warning on a screen. It had become a force on the ground, accelerating toward the heart of Tuscaloosa County. At 4:58 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado emergency for Tuscaloosa. This was the highest level of alert, reserved for the gravest threats to life and property. The bulletin's language was stark. This is an extreme danger to life and property. A large and extremely dangerous tornado is moving directly toward Tuscaloosa. Seek shelter immediately. For the people in the city, these words cut through the static of routine warnings. There was no ambiguity. This was the real thing, and it was coming fast. Inside the broadcast studios of ABC 3340, Chief Meteorologist James Spann stared at his monitors, voice tight with urgency. On live television, he pleaded, "Everyone into a bunker, please, immediately. There is a tornado heading this way." The gravity in his tone was unmistakable. Moments later, as the tornado's signature grew on radar and chaser cameras fed in live images, Spann's warnings grew sharper. "This is a tornado emergency. Get to your safe place now. It's coming right at Tuscaloosa. I've never seen anything like this. People are going to die if they're outside." His voice cracked, raw with the knowledge that seconds counted. Across Tuscaloosa, sirens wailed above the city's low skyline. Radio stations interrupted programming to repeat the warnings, and cell phones buzzed with alerts. In dorm rooms, classrooms, and crowded businesses, people scrambled for shelter. At the University of Alabama, students huddled in interior hallways, texting frantic messages to friends and family. Some found cover in basements or reinforced bathrooms, clutching whatever they could as the warnings echoed through televisions and radios. The tornado's approach was relentless. Chaser video streamed live, showing a massive dark wedge growing larger with every mile. Meteorologists on air described the threat in plain terms, abandoning technical jargon for direct commands. "If you are in Tuscaloosa, you must get to a safe place now." In the control rooms and weather offices, the tension was palpable. Radar indicated a debris ball, evidence that the tornado was already causing destruction. Forecasters relayed updates in rapid succession, watching as the storm's path aimed directly at the city's heart. There was no time for second guessing. Every broadcast, every warning was a race against the storm's forward speed. As the tornado closed in, the city's fate hung on the ability of these urgent messages to reach people in time. For many, it was the voice of a meteorologist, steady, alarmed, insistent, that spurred them to action. The warnings had never been more urgent, nor the consequences more immediate. The tornado entered Tuscaloosa with a force that defied imagination. In the neighborhoods closest to the University of Alabama, the storm's fury became personal. Houses that had stood for generations vanished in seconds. Apartment buildings crumbled, their walls collapsing inward as the wind roared through. The air filled with splintered wood, insulation, and the contents of hundreds of lives scattered across lawns and streets. Along 15th Street and the Forest Lake area, families and students huddled in bathrooms, closets, and hallways, listening to the sound of breaking glass and the groan of beams giving way. Some sent hurried messages to loved ones, brief texts and calls that cut out mid-sentence. For 6 University of Alabama students, those final moments came with no warning that it would be their last. Ashley Harrison, Joseph King, Spencer Durham, Trey Wilson, Megan Light, and Miranda Crowell lost their lives as the tornado tore through their homes and apartments. Their families would later describe the silence that followed, broken only by sirens and the distant shouts of neighbors searching for survivors. The scale of destruction along the university corridor was staggering. More than 5,000 homes, businesses, and campus buildings were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Entire blocks disappeared, leaving only foundations and scattered debris. Cars were tossed into trees, and familiar landmarks became unrecognizable. In Forest Lake, one family's story echoed the experience of so many others. The Moores had just moved into their new home when the sirens sounded. Sonia Moore gathered her children and took shelter in a closet. As the tornado struck, the door was ripped open and the wind nearly pulled her youngest child away. She held on with everything she had. When the storm passed, they emerged to find their house standing amid a sea of rubble, their neighbors' homes gone. The relief of survival mixed with the shock of loss and the knowledge that so many others were not as fortunate. The university community reeled. Students wandered the streets in disbelief, searching for friends, checking on roommates, and offering help where they could. Makeshift shelters sprang up in undamaged buildings, while volunteers and first responders navigated blocked roads and downed power lines to reach the injured. The loss of 6 students weighed heavily on the campus, each name a reminder that the tornado's toll was not just measured in numbers, but in lives and futures cut short. In the aftermath, the city would count its losses in thousands of ruined homes and businesses, but the grief was most acute in the stories of families and friends left behind. The storm had torn through the heart of Tuscaloosa, leaving scars that would last long after the debris was cleared. After tearing through Tuscaloosa, the tornado pressed on, relentless and undiminished. The storm's path widened as it moved into the suburbs, swallowing entire neighborhoods in a corridor up to 1.5 miles across. In some places, the damage stretched as far as the eye could see. Houses flattened, power lines tangled in the streets, and trees stripped of bark or snapped clean in half. The tornado's core winds, estimated between 170 and 190 miles per hour, left little behind but bare slabs and scattered debris. Emergency crews struggled to reach the hardest-hit areas. Roads were blocked by overturned vehicles and splintered lumber. In the chaos, radio traffic crackled with calls for help and urgent requests for backup. One first responder described the moment his team reached a devastated block in Pratt City, just outside Birmingham. You couldn't tell where the street ended and the yards began. It was all just wood and brick and pieces of people's lives. We called out, hoping for someone to answer, and sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. The tornado's physical scale became even more apparent as it crossed into Jefferson County. In areas like Concord and Pleasant Grove, entire rows of homes vanished, leaving only the outlines of foundations traced in the dirt. Vehicles were tossed like toys. Some carried hundreds of yards from where they'd been parked. Survivors crawled from the wreckage, dazed and bloodied, clutching whatever they could salvage. For many, the only landmarks left were the battered shells of churches or water towers still standing amid the ruin. Mobile Doppler radar and forensic surveys later traced the tornado's full path, 80 miles from its first touch near Union to its final gasps northeast of Birmingham. The width at its peak measured more than a mile, a rare expanse even among the most powerful storms. For 90 minutes, the tornado scoured the land, its winds strong enough to scour pavement from roads and drive splinters of wood into brick walls. The storm's multi-vortex structure meant that within the broader funnel, smaller, even more violent whirls carved their own trails of devastation. As the tornado neared the edge of Birmingham, it began to weaken, its roar fading to a distant rumble. The sky lightened and a stunned silence settled over the battered neighborhoods. For first responders and survivors alike, the end brought little relief, only the beginning of a long reckoning with what had been lost. The reality of the destruction, the breadth of the tornado's path, and the power of its winds would all be measured in the days and weeks to come. But in those first moments after the storm lifted, the reality was simple and overwhelming. The world had changed in the space of an hour and a half. Today, over a decade later, Tuscaloosa's scars remain visible. They are proof that extreme weather does not just rewrite maps, it redefines resilience. With billion-dollar tornado disasters now occurring more frequently in the U.S., the need for stronger infrastructure and early warning systems has never been more urgent. Nature's fury has not changed, but what we do next will decide who pays the price. Share your thoughts below.